I've been putting off buying a spanner set for a long time, and after I worked on a recent project, I realized it was probably about that time. So here's a quick run through of the Vera 6000 Joker set of spanners. Now, the reason that it took me so long to buy a spanner set is that spanner sets are expensive. I had a couple of Knipex pliers wrenches, and they can basically you turn any nut or bolt that you need, and you only need one or two of them. But at a certain point, I realized that, well, if you are turning a 17mm nut and you happen to have a 17mm spanner, then things basically just work out a little bit more easily. You don't need to fiddle with the adjustment and so on. And for a lot of projects that I would be working on, it's pretty common that you would just be having a whole bunch of M12 nuts to work with, or a whole bunch of M10s, something along those lines. So although a set like this does add up, you're getting a lot of tools, and you pick this thing up, and it's reasonably heavy. So it's a bit of an investment, but over the long term, it certainly makes sense. Now, the reason that I went with these Vera spanners is because I was interested by the sort of the special features that they have. I really like the small Joker adjustable size spanners that Vera sells. I don't have one on hand to show you, and I figured with that in mind, it would be worth, given that it's a bit of an investment anyway to buy a spanner set, that you may as well give these ones a shot. And I'm quite interested by the tricks they have up their sleeves. So let's take a look. The first thing that I noticed opening up this pack was that these spanners feel and seem quite large, and it surprised me a little bit, because then if I grab this silicone spanner I borrowed from downstairs, it's longer, but it's slimmer, because it doesn't, obviously the Vera have these little humps through the middle of them as part of their distinctive design, and that gives it a little bit of extra visual girth, I suppose. Now these are ratcheting spanners, and so it makes sense that the ratcheting end is a little bit thicker, and then from the head perspective, these two look quite similar. So although I had this initial impression of largeness, I think if you compare a 17 and a 17, there's not too much difference there. I had a non-magnetic copper beryllium spanner lying around, and just for comparison as well, this one's a bit shorter, and same sort of business here, that the ratcheting end is a little bit larger, the turning head is kind of roughly the same, and in terms of length, much for a muchness. Now, there's not too much to talk about with spanners. They go around your bolt head, and you can turn them. If you don't want to turn them, or you don't have space to turn them that much, you can flip them over, and you get a little bit of extra turniness without having to spin your spanner around its base by too much. On the flip side, if you have the ability to come from the top on or of course always on a bolt, you'll be able to come from the top, but if you have your nut and you can come through there, this gives you obviously a very controlled way of doing these things up and loosening them. What is different about these Vera spanners? Well, in the first instance, not too much. Okay, so the spanner goes on, and it turns the nut. Yeah. The ratchet goes on, and it can do its thing. But you may have noticed in comparing that there is a bit of a difference here in the angle of that head. So you can see the Sidchrome spanner that I have here has got that little angle, and that's what I was talking about with flipping it over, and you can get that angle gives you a little bit of control there, whereas this Vera head is straight. However, so you might say, well, you need to turn that full 60 degrees to turn that nut around, but this is actually what they call a double hex arrangement here. So you can turn a little bit, and with that 15-degree increment, you have to be a little bit careful here how you do that, but that means you don't have to flip the spanner around, and you can still turn that nut using the separate these little obviously the star indent there as well. So I thought that was pretty neat. You may notice this this separate plate here, which I suppose is replaceable, or at the very least removable. It's got these little teeth on there, and you may not be able to see that very clearly. No, focus is impossible. So anyway, there are these tiny little teeth on there, and in theory, those little teeth should give you a little bit more grip when you are turning like this, and you've got a bit of axial force there. It's kind of giving me a bit more bite there, as opposed to the smooth face, where it'll still grip on because of friction. It's a reasonably tight fit, but without the little teeth, there's a little bit of a chance that it might slip out sooner than the Vera one. This plate, however, does another thing, and this looks like a magic trick. So here's your nut. You're turning your nut. You need to be attaching your nut to your bolt. So you go to your thing, and you have to hold it in your hand, and it's a two-handed job and whatever. And it's what about if your actual spanner could hold your nut? So, ta-da! You can see, you may have to watch this very carefully, but that's because we have the points in this double hex arrangement, and the plate here provides you with a little shelf for that nut to sit inside. So I can just chuck my nut in my spanner, move to where it needs to go, and then start to do it up. I think that's really cute, and functional benefit to this somewhat unusual design. In addition, the other advantage to that little plate on the top there is that you can come down on the top of a nut, and it will stop the spanner from slipping vertically, and in fact it will also stop it from pulling out. So this gives you this really nice engagement with the nut, and essentially just makes controlling that a little bit easier. So is this a huge reason to go out and purchase a spanner set along these lines? Well, maybe not, but given that, like I said before, these spanner sets are expensive anyway, I think spending a little bit more money on a spanner with a few little extra benefits, you could just call them quirks or gimmicks. I guess that's up to you. For many people, they'll be more than happy with a shiny, relatively smooth, relatively simple, but tried and tested spanner. There's definitely nothing wrong with that. The last thing that I wanted to just kind of, I guess, take a bit of a look at here is that this is a Sid Chrome spanner. It's pretty decent. This is a stainless steel M12 bolt, so 17mm spanner, and in terms of the play here, you can see that there's a little bit of play as that fits in there. So you'd never expect a spanner to be completely flush with the bolt head or with the nut. If I do that same comparison here with the choker spanner, if anything, it may even be a little bit more precise in terms of how well it fits on there. And if we go with the in-hex, the double hex, then because we're sitting in the points there, there's arguably a little bit less play again, but there is still a bit of wiggle room. As I said, that's not going to not be able to get rid of that entirely. And interesting, like we said before, we can hold the nut, and that little shelf, due to that plate, also allows us to hold the bolt in place if we needed to kind of move it around and then start to do it up. I don't think that's a gimmick. I think that's actually super useful, but time will tell. Thanks very much.